So if I play to just show what's happening, but I'm basically using it here as a branch. Here I would have to directly call the function. Hi, so today we're gonna talk about cast and interfaces. The reason why I chose these two is because there are two useful ways to kind of retrieve data, but they work in very different ways, so to kind of highlight them. There is also many different other ways that you can retrieve data, but yeah, these two can be very useful if you use them properly, so I wanted to kind of showcase how I use them. I decided to show it through a project that I already have, so you can kind of see a practical way how to use it instead of just maybe showing like an empty project with like one example. So here what I have is an input action, which is grab, which is I cast a line trace from the camera and then just check if the object is geometry collection and something more after. So if I play to just show what's happening, so if I click on one of those objects and I hit it, it will check if it's a geometry collection actor, and then there is user video that's created and stuff like that, but we're gonna focus mainly on the casts and interfaces. Casts, for people that don't know, are basically how you get from like a more general class or the parent to the child. In here what we're doing, if I hover, we have the actor object reference, and then we are basically casting and checking if this actor is specifically a geometry collection actor. So this would be a parent, and then this would be the child. And if you're familiar with the hierarchy, we can type geometry collection actor. We can see how this is the parent, and basically this child is created from the parent and it has some additional functionality. So when you're casting, you can just use it to check this general or parent class is a specific class that you're interested in, or you can also use the cast to get a specific functionality that the parent does not have, and that would be this geometry collection component. So that's kind of unique for this guy, and also there is few other, I think. So that's kind of the menus. In here I'm just checking basically if the actor that we hit with the line trace, if it is specifically geometry collection actor. If it is, we continue with some functionalities, but if it's not, we basically terminate any action. Now this can be an expensive action, but I'm basically using it here as a branch, and since this is only triggered when the player presses a button, it's not like a continuous cast that is happening maybe every frame or incrementally or something like that, so it's not that expensive or the big deal, and we would have to have a branch here anyways if we were not using this cast, so there would still be some cost. That's one use, and the other use would be if I wanted to do specifically something with geometry collection actor. So if I pull from here and type get geometry collection component, if I try to type it in here, we will not find it because this component is only accessible through geometry collection actor. So that's kind of another use. Now interfaces. So interfaces are basically just functions. So the same way like you have functions in your blueprint class, interface gives you basically generic functions that you can attach to any actor, and then when you call that actor, you can just call that generic function, and if that actor implements it, it will be executed. So let's see in here where I'm using it. Let's find, I think I'm using it in here. One way that I'm using it in this project is the show object connector widget, which is called through the HUD and through the player controller. So I have my HUD manager, and in here I created my my interface and added it. You go to implemented interfaces and you can add it here. You have many Unreal's interfaces, but usually you're gonna have to create your own custom if you want to add any of your own functionality. And then if you click on the interfaces, you can see how we have few of the functions directly from that interface. So they're basically created when you add an interface. And if I try to find this interface, so let's go in here, open it up. We can see I created 3 functions in here, and I just added on one of them the connector widget reference, and this is basically how I can easily manage all of my menus in the game. So this is just object connector menu. This is specific for this project, but you can have in here pause menu, crafting menu, inventory menu, any type of menu, and then you can basically just put the calls in here or functions in here, attach this interface to your HUD, and that basically means that you do not have to directly call this HUD manager to call these functions. So if we go back to our component here, we can see that we are getting the player controller, we are getting the generic HUD object reference, and if I try to type in here, or if I tried to call functions from here and I did not use the interface, I would not be able to do it. But since we are using the interface, we can just call it directly in here, and since this guy is implementing those functions, it will call it successfully. So you can basically see it in here. When I try to click on the object, we can see the UI pops up in here. Another way, if I was not using interfaces, what I would have to do every time I want to show or hide a menu or a widget, what I would have to do is something like this: cast to HUD manager, and then from here I would have to directly call the function. And since we know that this is kind of expensive and we can do it more efficiently and better, it's also an additional node, so this way you kind of have simpler blueprints also. We can just find this generic HUD and call this very easily. So that's kind of the main use of the interface. Let me also show you another way that I use it. So another way that I use it is to basically manage. So I have a system here where I'm basically working with objects, and I have object data where I store data specific for my object. So if I zoom in here a bit, we can see we have a hinge in here, and then there is some I call them volumes here, but they are basically components, collision components, that also have some size that kind of define this object, where are the hinges, where are the attachment points, stuff like that. And since I have an interface, I can have a bunch of these, I call them object data, basically actors that have this 3D information of these objects that I can later, through the interface, send the information to whoever is basically asking for these interface functions. So then what's happening is that we have it in here. So basically we have the grabbed object, which is a geometry collection actor, and then we are getting, now this gets a bit more complicated, we're basically getting that geometry collection actor. But how my system works is basically we have GCA, this geometry collection actor, and on him we have an attached object data actor. Let's do it like this. Object data actor that is attached with geometry collection actor. So basically what we are doing is calling an interface for this object to get the reference of this object, and then we are basically returning this back. So we need this object data, so we know kind of what is connected, that we use it for geometry collection data. This is kind of ideal. I would have it all in one place, but just for performance reasons, because we don't always need it, this is just object data. The actual geometry collection actor that is in the world, that is interacting with physics, does not need to have these volumes. So just for performance reasons, as I separated them, and also how geometry collection actors work, it gets a bit complicated how Unreal works with them. So it will be also hard if I try to combine them into one. So I basically use interface here to get the object data, which is this, and then with the geometry collection actor, which is the actual object in the world that is moving around, has physics, can break, fracture, stuff like that. We get that object data reference, and then we can use the data. So basically all this information, I can extract it and then basically use it. So basically we are getting hinge data, which we can see in here. Hinge data where I connected everything that I needed for this object. We are basically getting it in here and then using it to manipulate or do something with the object. So yeah, that's kind of few ways that you can use these two things. And also keep in mind, you don't want to put everything into an interface or everything to cast. You try to kind of combine them, so interfaces work in places where they're most efficient at, and then you have casts where unit cast you can implement them. So you kind of have like a nice working blueprints instead of just forcing one thing where it doesn't belong. Other things a bit unrelated would be event dispatchers that you can use. So this is basically attaching an event of another blueprint class to an event of another blueprint. So you would basically say when this event triggers, go to this another blueprint, and then there is another event triggering there. You can also use direct references, which basically means you just I'm not sure if I can quickly show it in here, but that's just basically your standard. You have an object and you just call a function that is inside that object. So yeah, those are two. You're probably gonna if you're a beginner, you're probably gonna use direct references mostly. obviously, but you get the issue where then you have to save a bunch of variables that are maybe complicated objects. You get some memory issues if you're like saving everything. It can get overbearing. You also get issues when you have multiple objects of the similar type and you start using inheritance a lot. You can get some issues. So yeah, I'm kind of trying to stay away from inheritance as much as possible. I still of course use it. So for this object I have my actor data, and then all my object data uses the actor data as a parent, because we just have few things that we're gonna have to have for each of them. So I basically created a parent for that. But in general I'm gonna try to avoid it, just because interfaces can be very convenient and you can easily work with them. You can just call directly, just like this HUD manager, where I can just call this from wherever I want inside my blueprint. So yeah, that's about it. Hopefully it will help you create more efficient blueprints.